Today, there are 15 lakh Indians who work at global capability centers. This number is expected to grow 3 times to 45 lakh Indians by 2030. All of the large corporations that you can think of, from Google, Microsoft, SAP, they have already set up a GCC in India. And this, according to EY, is a 9 lakh crore opportunity in our country over the next 5 years. And there is an opportunity for us to repeat the success that we had in our early to mid 90s with the IT boom as a result of GCC. And in today's breakdown, we will be covering what is a GCC. We will understand how GCCs are slowly moving from metro India to small town, and we'll close out by examining the so what, which is what happens next with GCCs in India. Welcome to Breakdown. Let's get right into it. The Breakdown YouTube channel is part of the 01 network, and we're extremely grateful to them. With that, back to Breakdown. So the IT outsourcing industry was sparked in the early 1990s in India when the liberalization of the economy started. And you'd be amazed to know that the first movers in the IT outsourcing industry were not Indian companies, but the foreign corporations themselves who started to move their operations and their teams to India. The first among these was British Airways in the early 1990s. American Express followed in 1994. So in the early 90s, it was the foreign multinational corporations that were running IT outsourcing businesses in India. In the mid 1990s, there was a scare for something called Y2K. So very simply, it was a fear that when the year would switch from 1999 to 2000, it would break a lot of computer and cybersecurity systems. Now that never ended up happening, but it is this fear that drove a huge spike in the amount of IT to move to India. HSBC moved a large part of its operations to India in the mid 1990s. But there is one company whose name I'm sure you have heard of, and that is Genpact. It is a listed company on the Indian Stock Exchange today. So therefore, the origins of the IT outsourcing industry in India are actually in businesses that are very similar to global capability centers. And this takes us to the late 1990s. In the late 1990s, Y2K did not happen, but the dot-com bust happened. And in this massive stock market crash, there was a push for cost cutting and efficiency. And the two words cost cutting and efficiency are synonymous with outsourcing. Outsourcing is synonymous with India. And it is in this time period that a large number of BPOs started to get spun up in India to cater to these foreign corporations to cut cost. It is in this very era that Infosys launched its BPO, that Wipro acquired SpectraMind. And let's take a second to define what is a BPO. It stands for a business process outsourcing unit. The hallmark of BPO work is that it's a person like you who has to sit in front of the computer and do some tasks which is defined in an SOP and is evaluated against a SLA. And any task like this was classified as a BPO. And till today, there are thousands of people who work in the BPO industry. So this is what a BPO is in a nutshell. And despite this humble nature of work, BPOs have been commercially incredibly successful in India. And therefore, not only do we have a generation of public companies from the BPO era, they were also extremely lucrative financial transactions from an acquisition perspective that happened during the BPO era. Now we move from the BPO era to the KPO era. And this takes us to the early 2000s. So there was a set of pioneering foreign MNCs that started to push a lot of the low-level, low-skill operational tasks to India. But over the years, they started to realize that the local talent base in India was not just cut out to do this low-level work. They could also do a certain set higher value-add tasks like accounting, like marketing, like financial modeling. Now, the difference between a KPO and a BPO is that in a KPO, the employees have some form of domain knowledge. They are not working against an SLA, but they are instead applying their domain knowledge to form an opinion and execute on a task. But the deliverable here was slowly starting to being measured in terms of quality of work and business outcome that is being driven by the team at the KPO. Now, the pioneer of KPOs in India was McKinsey, that set up McKinsey Knowledge Center in 2000 in Gurgaon. It's also in this era that there were vertical focused knowledge processing organizations that were founded and ended up being sold for a respectable amount of money. Now, all of the KPO firms are very well known today. From KPMG, Ernst & Young, members of the Big Four accounting firm are the largest contributor to India's KPO industry. Also, India's legal firms do a significant amount of outsourcing for global legal firms. So we went from BPO to KPO by the 2000s. From the late 2000s to early 2010, we started to work on very tactical research and development. And this, by the way, was the era of real success because the foreign MNCs, along with their local outsourcing partner, took well-educated graduates from an engineering background and paired them with a business stakeholder who was based overseas where the client was. And this led to a decision analytics revolution in India. And this revolution has also created some sizable outcomes. Latent View Analytics did an IPO in 2021 and is today an 8,300 crore market cap company. Even in the decision analytics revolution of India's KPO industry, we've already had substantial financial outcomes. And this brings us to the real turning point. It was now not a unique insight that India had a high quality, low cost and high intensity talent pool with STEM degrees that was available to work not just on operational tasks, not just on knowledge work, but also on technology IP creation and research and development. Now, by 2010, the MNCs started to realize that they were quite dependent on their foreign outsourcing partner. The scope of work had increased. In some cases, they were now relying on the vendor for sensitive work. And in addition to this, the margins that were being charged by some of these outsourcing players were quite healthy. So the question was, if the talent is here and the leaders are in India, is it not possible for me to cut the middleman, who is the outsourcing vendor, out and set up an outsourcing unit myself? This was already being done, as we saw with American Express, HSBC. These were back then called captive centers, and now captive centers are known as global capability centers. In the early 2010s, that global capability centers really started to take off in India. In 2011, US retailer Target set up its global capability center in Bangalore. Target was followed by Wells Fargo, the global financial giant JP Morgan, and JP Morgan Global Service Center is a first real GCC because they were building fraud models, trading models, doing risk management, and actually building out a full suite banking product from the Indian office. And now you will see the theme starting to emerge. So a global capability center is owned and operated by the foreign multinational corporation. The global capability center focuses only on that one client, and the type of work is very similar to what today a product-based company does, which is research and development, IP creation, software engineering, hardware and product testing. And this is why we say that global capability centers are the final arc of India's outsourcing industry. We began in the early 1990s focusing on very basic operational tasks. We then moved to knowledge work, and now from the 2010 onwards, core business of the foreign MNC by creating intellectual property or by doing research and development. So now that you've understood how a global capability center is different from a BPO and a KPO, let's deep dive into an example of one global capability center. And this is the Lloyds Banking Group Technology Center in the city of Hyderabad. Now, LBG has a long history of outsourcing work to India. On 31st October 2003, LBG shut down a 1,000-person call center and moved this entire operation to India. And the types of roles that they were moving were extremely clerical in nature. And slowly the work that was being outsourced moved from BPO work to KPO work. So in 2006, they began outsourcing human resources Services to Zansa Consulting. In August 2007, they moved 210 software engineering jobs to India. So LBG had gone on this journey from using India as a BPO hub to a product development hub, which is what resulted in them finally pulling the trigger to start Lloyd's Technology Center in Hyderabad. And they came in with a bazooka, a £4 billion commitment. At the time of launch itself, they hired 600 people and their target was to have 6,000 people on board. This does not sound like outsourcing. And this brings us to a question: why should metro cities have all the fun? And the answer is metro cities are not having all the fun. As of today, we have 1,500 GCCs in India, out of which 150 GCCs are based in non-metro cities. And there is a belief that every year we will add 150 new GCCs in India. Almost 75% of the new GCCs to be done so by smaller foreign firms. Now, smaller to mid-sized foreign firms are cost conscious for setting up a global capability center. And ultimately, a GCC is a human capital business. The advantage that tier 2 and non-metro cities have over metro cities is that there is a 30% lower attrition and a 35% lower operational expense. And therefore, smaller to mid-sized foreign multinational firms tend to prefer setting up a GCC in a non-metro city because it is easier to retain staff and it is cheaper on their budget. You'd be surprised to know that MasterCard launched a global capability center in Vadodara. Now that I mentioned MasterCard, even American Express has a center of excellence based in Pune, which is another example of a GCC. Some of the criteria that work for a non-metro city to become a GCC hub is that they should have local universities that are producing high-quality STEM graduates. These graduates should be willing to stay in their hometown. There have to be some form of benefits to set up the offices, and the cost of living has to be relatively low. And as you expect, there should be some form of road, rail, or flight connectivity with an international airport to allow the leadership team to make comfortable trips to the domestic office. And this brings us to what next? Now, the future is uncertain. This is very true. And let's start with the impact of geopolitics. And earlier this year in July, the Indian government signed a landmark free trade agreement with the government of the United Kingdom. And this has a major impact on 75,000 Indian IT professionals. It is projected that a typical Indian IT worker based in the UK will save up to 20% of their salary as a result of this double tax agreement. The flip side to this is, at the time of us recording this breakdown, India and the United States are negotiating on tariffs, and there is a unilateral 50% tariff that has been imposed on select Indian exports. Now, at the time of us recording this, the US has not imposed a tariff on service exports, but there is a risk that if this tariff war and dispute escalates, that Indian IT services and outsourcing could also be impacted. Now, at its core, the IT outsourcing is a cost of labor plus profit margin business. And if tariffs are imposed, the cost of providing the service increases. And as the cost of hiring increases, it makes India's outsourcing industry less attractive to foreign multinational corporations. The next risk arises because of AI. As all of you know, I am an AI agent, and I find it very odd to tell people that most of the work done at global capability centers is software or hardware engineering. The risk of AI is most pronounced for software engineering roles. And in the last maybe 24 months, we've seen hundreds of software engineers get laid off. And if AI tools for code gen result in a step change in engineering productivity, it could potentially result in a reduction of software engineering work outsourced to India and may result in insourcing. Now, the panic button reaction here is to say, oh no, global capability centers are a counter to the Indian IT outsourcing industry. And as more foreign multinational corporations set up their own global capability center, the Indian outsourcing industry will have less contracts. Now, you can either sit with your hands tied and accept this future, which is going to eat into your revenue, or you can embrace this change and work with foreign multinational corporations to set up their global capability centers. And the Indian IT services industry is doing exactly this by following up a concept which is predominantly used in the infrastructure industry, which is build, operate, lease, transfer, abbreviated as BOLT. In the context of outsourcing, this is called the BOT model, where you build, operate, and then transfer the outsourcing center to the foreign client. In 2016, Answers Consulting partnered with Delta Airlines, and in 2019, Answers Consulting handed over this outsourcing business to Delta Airlines. And in fact, this space is getting investor attention as well. So the Indian outsourcing giants are not sitting with their hands tied. They are embracing GCC as the next journey in the Indian outsourcing industry. It's very clear that global capability centers are the natural next evolution of India's outsourcing industry. We began in the early 90s doing low-level operational work. By the early 2000s, we moved from operational tasks to knowledge work, and by the early 2010s to mid-2010s, we moved towards high-value-add core domain work for the foreign MNCs. The Indian IT outsourcing industry created crorepatis, and our belief at Breakdown is that global capability centers will create a wave of millionaires in India. So we will get 30 lakh additional high-paying jobs that will contribute over 9 lakh crore to our GDP. And of course, there is some risk involved here, like it will eat into the existing IT outsourcing industry. There is a risk that geopolitics may backfire, and there is a risk that AI may reduce the amount of software engineers that firms overseas are hiring. While the future is somewhat unclear, what is clear is that GCCs are here to stay, and they will grow in a bigger way than ever before. We have 1500 GCCs in India right now. We're opening 120 to 150 new GCCs every year, which is almost one GCC every alternate day of the calendar year. And that's all from us at Breakdown. Thank you and goodbye.